Sup, sea creatures, it's Wave, and, as you know, probably, if you follow Spider Crow, they put out a video about sharks the other day, and after watching it, I felt inspired a little, and also my friend, whose voice you heard in probably one of the videos, was learning about stuff in social studies, and I seem to be really good at the topic. They were learning about the Cold War, which for some reason I remember a lot of the stuff. So basically this is just a bunch of organized wording, or wrong phrase, organized word vomit. Yes, I have a script because I needed to write this stuff down before I'd forget, so I didn't miss anything in the video. So if I look down, there is a book here with my info in it. If you guys would like to see more of these, then just let me know. There's a few more that I would like to cover myself. And as for that, let's get into it. So, the Cold War refers mainly to the war that happened between the USA and the USSR, which was Russia. Soviet Russia. Because, yes. This happened between the times of 1945, so right after World War II, basically, to 1991, which is a lot of years, not very far from the year I was born. So this war went on for a while, 50 years basically, and crazy. Children. So a hot war, or no, a Cold War refers to that time period, but it also means that there was no actual fighting, like physical fighting. Like, say, like when you and your siblings fight, you either use words, which was what the Cold War was, or you physically fist fight, which is what's considered to be a hot war, which was World War I and World War II. They are considered hot wars because there was actual warfare. The Cold War did have some warfare, but it was indirect and not between the two countries. They were helping out with other countries, or helping out. I'll get to that a little later. So, there was some agreements that I don't really recall and I haven't really written down that went on right after World War II ended, and there was basically like, yes, France, Britain, and the US get these 3/4 of Germany, because Germany had basically fallen, which basically ended World War II. And so there was the Allies and Russia fighting over Germany space. So they did these agreements to sort out who got what area, which also ended up splitting up Berlin, because Berlin was in the USSR side, and the US didn't, mainly the US, as far as I'm concerned, it was mainly the US was like, no, you can't have the capital all to yourself. So they split Berlin the same way as they split Germany, which was 3/4 of it was the Allies and the other one was the USSR. Which, woo! So, another thing you should know is that the USSR, or the Soviets, were communist, which means that basically as a collective group, they wanted to work together, and it's an idea based off of Karl Marx, who technically is the father of communism because he's the one who came up with the idea that everyone needed to work together. and that there was going to be a revolution of the workers versus the owners, or the proletariat, the workers, fighting or revolting against the bourgeoisie or the owners, and then they would all end up working together and peaceful with daisies and everything. Or that's how I interpreted it. But Russia kind of didn't do that at all. There was a lot of fast revolutions, and there was a bunch of war stuff that happened, which led them to being what they were. Whereas the US is capitalist, which is based off of an idea of individualism, and is an idea based from, I believe it's Adam Smith. Yes, that name rings a bell. Adam Smith, a philosopher. Karl Marx is also a philosopher. So the US didn't want the communists to take over the world. And the communists didn't really want the capitalists there because they had different ideas, and therefore started a war. Using mainly words. This happened basically after this agreement that happened. So there was a bunch of things that happened, which so in what I learned from textbooks and videos and stuff, there were 10 main things that happened, and I'm going to cover all of those and give you some examples, and what I remember from some of the examples I will explain. This is just, again, what I know, what I've read, what I've watched, and what I remember. Because I know there was a bunch of stuffs like the Berlin airlift, and there was a bunch of agreements and stuff. Woo! Basically, it just goes way over your head when you're trying to remember everything. So I'm just going to cover what I remember. So remember those wars I was talking about earlier? The ones where the US and the USSR were indirectly helping or indirectly having wars? Those were considered to be proxy wars, which is what I just said. They're small wars that the US and the USSR supported certain sides that were fighting with their ideas. Most of them were North versus South, the North being communist and the South being capitalist, and let's just say some of them didn't work out. So some of the wars were, or three of the main ones that many people remember, are the Korean War. That left Korea still split up today, and nobody basically can get to North Korea. So, good for you guys. But they're still at like a standstill kind of thing, that if like anything could set them off. As far as I remember, they just basically stopped fighting because they were like, okay, let's stop for now. So there's a bunch of like dead no man's land between the two countries. This is all, again, my memory from what I learned in school. There was the Afghan War, which we lost a lot of people in, and there was the Vietnam War, which many people in the US specifically didn't think that they should have gone to that war because there was no point to going to it, but yet they still went to it because the US is like, hey, we need to stop capitalism. This is the only way we can seem to do it. So stop. Okay? This in the US was technically a form of containment where they were trying to contain capitalism. Oh, so there was also a bunch of agreements and stuff that were signed because of that. I don't remember all of the agreements because you're just like, oh yes, exam, goodbye, information that I knew. So, deterrence. That is another term where you're basically building up your defenses, like your military, your naval, your nuclear. And this is mainly by the government to avoid aggressive actions. So, what the US and the USSR did was they built up a bunch of nuclear weapons, so technically if it did go into a hot war, we'd all be dead. You'd just be like, there's nothing here to survive anymore because nuclear explosions! We know from some other World War II, the bombs that the US dropped on Japan. Yeah! No thank you. No thank you. I don't really feel like having a world of entirely just... So, next was espionage, which is spying. There's nothing really to explain there. They were spying on each other to steal ideas and stuff. And if you got caught, you got in trouble. Or if you were suspected of helping, especially in the US, there was a thing called, I think it was called the Red Scare, which had to do a lot with the communists and the bombing, like afraid that people are going to come bomb you, or that the communists are working against you, or that everyone's a communist, because everyone was so paranoid at that time that it was actually going to go to a war, but it didn't. Thank God it didn't. So that's basically espionage, is spying. Defense system build-ups. They built up defenses like earlier, the deterrence. They built up military defenses and stuff so that if they did go into a war, that they'd be ready. And they were also trying to scare the other people away, because they're like, hey, I have more weapons than you do. Try and fight me. Ah, beautiful. Just kidding. Space races. Let's see who gets to space first, and walk on the moon and stuff. Which, there have been conspiracies that the first man on the moon thing is a conspiracy. That it's not real. Which I'm not going to get into because that'd make the video a lot longer. So the space races, like, we get the first animal to space, the first human, the first space shuttle, space station, stuff like that. Like, who could get it first? Because if you could get to space, then you could scare the other people into thinking you'd send bombs into space, or nuclear things into space, and it'd be a lot easier to stalk the other humans. Yay! Arms race. Arms, in this case, means military, land military, whereas naval is ocean. I think I have it correct. But if you build up your land territory, then you can go attack the other people. It's basically just a way to scare the other side. I'm going to skip that one because that is my favorite one. So balance of power. This was to equalizing their strengths, so with their allied forces to make their side stronger. So the US signed NATO with the Allies, and the USSR signed the Warsaw Pact with their allies so that they would have allies against each other. I'm pretty sure that's all that was, is just balance of power. You have allies. Look, if you attack us, we can attack you back, kind of thing. Propaganda. Um, basically manipulating or brainwashing people through media is what it was. So if you do look up stuff, there was posters. Most of the ones that I saw through school were the US against the USSR. I barely saw any of the USSR ones, but that's because being so close to the US, you learn about their history and you're just like, why do I need to know this? And you're also like, what part did I play in this, or my country, or whatever. So we learned about this. Most propaganda stuff was just, we need you to fight against the communists and whatnot. And most of them were posters or on the radio. Some of them were on TV, if you were lucky enough to have a TV, I'm pretty sure back then. So yeah, that was that. And then there was the prestige race, which was showing your power in non-militaristic ways, such as through the Olympics, or other stuff like science is another one, but mainly through the Olympics. And I'm not that much into sports, so I'm not really gonna cover that. But yeah, apparently Canada is very good at hockey. From what I remember, Canada beat the Russians in hockey, which is not surprising, since it is the Canadian national sport. No wonder we would win. And lastly, of these 10, there's 10 strategies, is what my source material said, is brinkmanship, which is pushing to the brink of war. And that actually almost happened. The event in which that happened is the Cuban Missile Crisis. Which is my favorite by far, because it's so simple to figure out. It is literally the biggest game of, he's touching me, and no, I'm not. That's basically how to explain it. So what happened was the US was flying over Cuba, which they weren't supposed to do as far as I know. So they were flying around in their aircrafts and they saw what looked to be missiles. Soviet missiles. You get my point. So the US called Russia and was like, hey, remove your missiles, or otherwise we're going to go into war. And the USSR started forming their little boats, and they sent their boats over to Cuba. And they were like, no, we're not going to remove these, we're going to bring more, kind of thing. And so every few, they'd get closer, and everyone in the US went into a panic, because they were like, oh no, we're actually going to go into a war. We're actually going to go to a war. And the US is like, no, you can't do this. And the USSR just kept inching closer and closer and closer. And then eventually they were close enough to actually start a war. And the entire world is like, shit, we don't need this right now. Please stop. But they were on their own, because the USSR just kept inching closer, and the US kept freaking out. And eventually they came to terms that they can't go into an actual war, because it would destroy the planet, or just destroy their countries and stuff. So they agreed on a truce that if the USSR removed their missiles, from Cuba, that the USA would remove their missiles from a country that was really close to Russia, because for some reason they were like, you come here, we'll go there. But that was before, and they basically switched places where their missiles were. So that solved basically everything. But that incident, the fact that they were so close, they actually almost threw the Cold War into a hot war, and that would have been World War III. So glad they didn't. So, yeah, that is basically all I know about the Cold War. Again, if there are anything, like any historical things that you would like me to look up, I will, and I will make a video about them. I have a few that I would like to do myself. So, thank you for watching. I hope this was helpful. I do suggest not using this for educational purposes, but if you need a brief reminder of stuff, then you can use it. I did this for fun. I do enjoy learning. Same as Spider Crow. Most of my reference material came from my grade 11, 12 textbooks, my notes and stuff that I took in class. So I don't really know how to reference it here. Some of the videos I watched was Crash Course. He's amazing. Specifically Crash Course World History for these ones. But yes, you should check that one out. Check it out. I can link it down. Or link, maybe if I'm allowed, to link to his channel down here. Yeah. Glad, I'm being awkward now. And it's still recording. So, if you enjoyed this video, just please comment some other things you would, I should rephrase, historical things, or places that you would like me to look up. I'm also interested in learning about basically anything. Thank you for watching again. Bye, sea creatures.